Good evening, and welcome to the Perspecticast, the podcast companion to the Panda Perspective Substack. This week, we wanted to address some of the plans and developments on the Substack, and also to talk about the China market and where it is now, where it's going to, and how we are going to help you figure it out going forward. First of all, I would like to put on record a heartfelt thank you to each and every one of you who's been listening, reading, and consulting us here at Panda HQ with regards their China exposure. It means the world to us. I would also note that we would like to make our offering better. We would like to make our offering work for more people and sort of be bigger and more meaningful ways, but more on that in a bit. We would like to first of all, note that quietly, or maybe not so quietly, China's actually had a pretty good first quarter. Maybe not in the A shares, where the performance has been basically just above flat, but in the overseas component, where Hong Kong shares are up almost 18%, and some of the US-listed names are down a lot more. I'm looking at things like Baba, for example, are well over 50%, and the average ADR is up probably around 22-23%, depending on what you're including in a particular list. Maybe more importantly, FXI, KWeb, all of them are up around about 20%, which I think as a measuring stick is pretty good. Our very own Panda portfolio is up over 21%, which we're also quite excited for, but we wouldn't take that as a measuring stick for the broader market. So all of that is to say that the backdrop has been the international section of the China market has gone back to pricing in something similar to what the onshore market was pricing. The discounts in Hong Kong have widened over the course of 2024. Now they are closing back in, and that process is kind of what we've been talking about the onset of our blog. We're saying that it's likely that foreign listed names are going to be the first ones to start moving, as overseas assets were priced particularly badly. They were priced for a particular terrible scenario for China, and it becomes increasingly clear that that's just not on the cards. Even a quote-unquote bad scenario for China is going to lead to a more active response from the Chinese government, which in turn will make the scenario less bad. In fact, it seems like at this point, it's all but assured that that's exactly the playbook that will be followed. And the quote-unquote good scenario is also going to be helped by a more proactive response from the Chinese government. So this has been the mantra of this blog for quite some time. So I'm not going to regurgitate that again, but suffice to say that we believe that we are close to playing that particular angle out. Now, that's not to say that there aren't bargains out there in the Chinese equity space. Some of these bargains are something that we will be wrestling with sort of on and off throughout the duration of this blog, because things like PVD, for example, we had a very interesting exchange on Twitter today, for example, detailing exactly that, because on the one hand, it is really, really cheap. On the other, it's clear that the management isn't overly concerned with the price of the stock, at least not yet, and it's equally likely that the price of the equity is going to treble or get cut in half by the end of the year, because it's quite clear to see the pathway to that. That said, we believe that the payout matrix is skewed heavily in the upside direction, but nevertheless, the downside is still there. And it's things like that that we'll continue to see as opportunities in the market, but it is not fair any longer to say that, we're shooting blindly into a bucket of Chinese equity names. You will be hitting a two-bagger, for instance. Given the performance that even things like Baidu have had, right? It's reasonable to say that they've bounced off the lows and they're looking for the next source of performance. And that's basically where we are entering to Q25. We are looking for the next source of growth. This is likely to come from a proactive government policy, A, being confirmed, and B, yielding results. The B is easier. We will be data dependent. We will be looking at official data releases. We'll be looking at company earnings and earnings announcements, new product announcements, and high frequency data such as consumption levels, PMIs, and things like that, that will give us a fairly good understanding on how successful the government's been thus far in shifting into consumption encouragement mode. Now, nothing can happen overnight, right? It's not one of those changes that you snap your fingers and it just happens, even if you're Xi Jinping, right? What will be required is a meticulous implementation of the decisions of the NPC of this year. And for the record, we believe that the government is up to it and they will get it done. And in turn, the private sector is up to it and they will respond as well. So that's the second part of it. The first part is, of course, trying to understand what the equity market response will be to all of this and where is the next productive place to fish. And this will be exactly the goal of the blog for the second quarter, is to figure out what these new themes are that we should be paying attention to. Are these just old themes that are continuing along? Are these brand new themes? Or are these altered versions of some of the old themes that we haven't looked at for some time? I'm particularly interested in new tech, hard tech. That is to say that looking at the AI world, even though it's generating all the headlines, it's generating all the buzz around China tech, right? Your DeepSeek moments and things like that, or even Alibaba moments with Manos and Quen and things like that. Nevertheless, it's also evident that AI is not going to be a profit driver for Chinese tech. Instead, it will be a tool that will be implemented across the board, from software to a whole bunch of hardware, including robots and cars, that will help them compete globally. With that in mind, where does one put their money to work at? That's the question. And to answer it properly, we need to look at all the moving parts in their equation. And that's exactly what we'll be doing in the second quarter. We will focus on robots first. That is something that is not native to us. The humanoid robots in particular are a fairly new thing. Getting to the bottom of what makes them tick, as it were, is going to be a challenge, but it is a challenge that we are willing to undertake. We will also be looking at anything to do with components, both physical and software-based for these machines, and also how that ties into industrial automation, a theme that we already touched on earlier in the year. All of it is interesting, exciting, but also an awful lot of work. So we're probably going to one article a week, at least for the foreseeable future, i.e. the next 2-3 weeks, just simply on account of the insane amount of reading that we intend to, have started on and intend to finish over the course of the next couple of weeks. It's going to be a steep learning curve, and it's one that, we're more than happy to sort of scale, but it does have a time commitment to go with it. In conjunction with that, there are a couple of regular industries that we'd like to touch up upon. These things, it'll be hard to know for sure when exactly we'll find time to do that, but a broad consumer update is due and perhaps overdue. A update of the steel sector is something that we very much like to do. Copper as well, another one of those things that we'd like to pay some attention to. All these things are they're on the time card, but it is not clear when exactly we'll be able to get to them. But we're aspiring to do just that. There is, of course, a need to look at the battery space again, because batteries, big parts of EVs, big part of green energy transition, big part of energy system diversification, big part of robotics, big part of humanoid robots. So that is another one that is very much a nice to have. And again, something that would try and crowbar into our already fairly busy schedule. So I guess that's a taster of what's to come on the Substack. Now, obviously, it's important to understand that most of it is probably going to be behind the paywall. Again, given the time constraints, it is very hard to justify writing pre-articles, given that whilst it is interesting and fun, and we appreciate those that choose to spend their time subscribing, even to the free section of the blog, the amount of work that goes into figuring these new sectors out is quite considerable. So on the robot side, at the very least, there's probably going to be only one generally available article. Everything else is going to be behind a paywall. On the other sectors, we will see how it goes, but I think it's fair to say that the general expectation should be around about that there's going to be one free article per sector, and the rest is going to be behind the paywall. Anything to do with takes on companies, on products, and things like that is probably likely to be in and around the paywall area. We have also announced last week that our Panda Perspective Inc. is finally ready, incorporated in Delaware, and ready to take on clients Now, obviously, this is just for people who really, really enjoy the Panda perspectives, because those are expensive engagements. Thank you. I've already had all the feedback about how it's ridiculously priced and all that. I appreciate the feedback, but my feedback to that is that it is worth it for those that need it. In fact, some of the more recent clients have told us that it's still too cheap, which, we appreciate the sentiment. Nevertheless, it is still exactly that. It's the idea of figuring out the people who need the Panda input on their portfolios and are prepared to pay for it, therefore making sure that we're optimizing our time usage, that we're applying our time exactly where it's needed and where it's appreciated. So if you are one of those people who would like to participate, there is a link in the description of the video to check out our offering and get in touch, basically, to talk about it if you think this is right for you. And you'll know exactly if it's right for you or not. If it is, we're more than happy to consider your circumstances, wherever you are in the world. I think China journey is only just beginning. I fully anticipate to be doing this for some time to come. It is my personal belief and belief of all of us here that China market is structurally entering a very different phase for itself. It's going from a curiosity and a uniformly hated that shouldn't even exist, because how can you possibly justify having a equity market in a Marxist country, to realizing that capital market is necessary in any modern day setup. Any country that is not failing needs a mechanism to allocate capital efficiently and effectively, and China is no exception. In fact, all across Asia, there is realization that a working equity market is a necessary part of being a developed economy. That is why we've seen stock market reforms in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and now China. So we are believers in that. We're believers that this will spread throughout Asia, across ASEAN, most notably. But of course, it'll take some time, right? And of course, China is the first one to go. And secondly, the tailwind to this process would be the growing importance of China as a export destination, as an import destination. So export for other countries into China and for Chinese imports of goods, not just commodities, but also as Chinese consumers become more important consumers of our domestically produced goods, access to Chinese markets will become much more of a thing. Now, this is not a question for 2025. I'm not saying that by the end of 2025, European companies will be competing for access to Chinese domestic market. No. Admittedly, they've already been doing it over the course of many years, but what I'm talking about, this new level of competition, because opening up of Chinese domestic industry continues, even if we don't really talk about it. What is going to happen eventually is that Chinese consumers are going to get welfare, and they're going to be buying more things, more different things. Some of them produced domestically, some not so much. And it is that process that will really help rebalance the world, right? The rebalancing of which we spoke of on a number of occasions, and part of which is more production moving out of China. So even if it might not seem obvious right now, I think it'll be a very good development for China and for Chinese companies in the very long run. And again, this is a very long-term move, and this is just a very long-term perspective of ours. That is to say that the China journey, China equity journey, is just beginning. And I, for one, am very excited for it. So hopefully we are in the process of building some long-term relationships here, and I do hope that you'll be able to join us in small installments for now. Let's just get through second quarter of this year, but slowly but surely, hopefully, it will lead to big and exciting things for all involved. And I do hope that you've enjoyed the journey so far, and I hope you will continue being with us as we move forward with all of this. As usual, if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, please reach out. Otherwise, we'll speak to you next week.